Welcome, everyone, to today's LinkedIn Live. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm your host and moderator. I'm going to introduce our guests in just a second. I want to get into our topic today: how to use behavioral data without losing the human element. Excited for this. We've all kind of been using various behavioral data and assessment data for quite some time, and so I'm curious to have this conversation with folks. It's a really interesting area. I know you can be kind of loaded in different ways. I think we all have some kind of pros and cons and some interesting ways of how to approach it and how to use it effectively and how to do it in a way that doesn't take away kind of that human element that you still need to apply all these kind of decisions and all these kind of discussions too. So with that, let me introduce our guests. Damon Clark is up first. He is head of Talent Optimizer, and he is the owner there. And he spent more than 25 years leading cross-functional teams across multiple international markets. He's worked with organizations including HubSpot, Acer, Dell, EMC, and the Predictive Index. And today he's helping organizations hire, retain, and develop talent while aligning with teams and strategies. Damon, welcome to the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. Next, I got Scott Witcher. He is a sales director at Talent Optimizers, and he's a talent optimization expert. He focuses on helping organizations unlock full potential of their people, and he works aligning talent strategy with business goals and business strategy through behavioral analytics, performance data, strategic insights. He is also publicly described as a hiring and talent optimizing expert. With all that, Scott, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Bruce.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So before we get started, I want to let our guests know if you have a comment or question and you want to send it into the conversation here, go ahead and put it on the LinkedIn page. We'll be watching that for any comments or questions. We're happy to answer them as they come up. We'll weave those in. We're also streaming on YouTube here. If you happen to be on YouTube, the comments should come through. Sometimes they don't always come through on YouTube, though. So jump over to LinkedIn if you want to make sure that you get your comments in here. We'll check those live as we go. Also, if you are on the replays on either LinkedIn or on YouTube, feel free to leave comments there. We'll follow those pages in the coming days and week, and we'll make sure we respond to people. So even if you're watching replay, go ahead and leave them there. So with all that, let's get into our conversation. And I want to start with just kind of your general take on behavioral data, right? Because I think a lot of people, this is sometimes feels more like a art than a science. And so I kind of want to understand your approach to when you think about behavioral data and assessments. I always kind of use the phrase like all assessments are wrong. Some of them are useful, right? It's like the question of, what are we really doing? When we assess somebody and we're looking at behavioral data, what is that actual data? What does it tell us? What does it not tell us? Let's do some grounding here. Damon, why don't we start with you? Give us your kind of rubric for using data or what behavioral data means.
Yeah, so first off, I think when we approach this subject, particularly leadership teams, there's a eye rolling going on.
Yeah.
Because we talk about DISC or insights or Myers-Briggs or predictive index, and that's the main behavior. There's other forms of behavioral data, which I'm sure we'll get into, but that's the main tool we use. And there's often a little bit, we've done this before.
Yeah.
And usually what happens is they do their assessment, they think this is great, they enjoy it, they put it in a desk drawer or store it away on their computer and then never apply it. So that's the first kind of objection we often have to undercome. I think people see the value, but unfortunately, after that initial hit, the practical application and the usage kind of dies off. So behavioral assessments have been about for years and years and years, and I can get geeky on the history if you like. Because there's some kind of World War II stuff going on where a lot of money was pumped in to develop it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the first thing I'd add is the initial kind of skepticism. But currently with AI and what's going on at the moment, the whole industry has changed and it's quite exciting. So I'll start there. And Scott, do you want to add anything on that?
How do you think about it, Scott?
Yeah, I always try and ground it in the idea that people are really complex, which is where I think a lot of the skepticism comes from. Because how could an assessment put me in a box? How could it understand everything about me? And I ground it there to simply say, good assessments don't try to, right? Mm-hmm. So when we think about behavioral data and the lens that we put on it, we're really trying to just look at certain aspects of who you are and sort of how you're wired, right? So, to use the DISC or predictive index examples, those are really just trying to measure some innate drives that are stable over time, things that don't change about us. Do we like to collaborate, or do we prefer to work autonomously? Are we extroverted, or are we more introspective? So by narrowing the scope of what we're trying to measure, you build a little bit of credibility because it's repeatable, it's stable, things like that. So I try to ground it and say, hey, we're looking at a whole person. This is just one small part of it, right? It's not your whole personality. It doesn't mean you can't have different feelings or act a different way sometimes. But yeah, we really try to make it stable, be really specific about what we're trying to take a look at, and go from there. And I think that's useful, and most people can relate to that because we all tend to have some things we know about ourselves that are true. And when an assessment can reflect that, then we can kind of buy in and understand the credibility behind it.
Yeah. I always think of it as they're data points, right? Like there's,
it's a data point. Exactly.
Hundreds of things, hundreds of characteristics that define people and personalities and how they work. And, we're taking a handful of these and figuring out, okay, can we use these to develop some insights that we can use to make better decisions around in terms of, whether it's hiring or whether it's staffing or whether it's teaming or whether it's, alignment and roles. Or just performance, evaluations, and like, hey, look, how are you going to approach this challenge differently than someone else, and how do we help you, leverage that in positive ways and avoid some of the pitfalls that may come up. Let's talk a little bit about how we apply some of this data. So we have an assessment, we've got this data around individuals and teams. What are some of the insights that we can actually get from behavioral data that we can't necessarily get from other types of data? Damon, why don't you kick us off on this one? Like where does this lead us in terms of the questions we can ask or the insights we can generate?
Sure. First, we're going back to the last conversation. I usually say it's a dialogue, not a diagnosis. But yeah, going back and thinking a bit more strategically. So before we kind of engage clients, often clients come to us because there's some dysfunction, or there's some friction in that leadership team. And so what we like to do is kind of take a step back and start using some data to understand, potentially what's going wrong. So we have a few assessments to do that. We do have a kind of free workshop we kind of offer, which is kind of trying to set the foundation of what a high performing team is, and trying to benchmark it is, because we find typically of leadership teams, they their commitment to training. So these are the common challenges we have, that they struggle with a robust way of developing, implementing and tracking strategy. And that's why we work with you sometimes. We're not really good at running meetings. There's often some behavioral challenges in that meeting, with high dominant behavior causing artificial harmony. And another one we get is there's no kind of long-term strategic plan for training and development. So we think about that, the one team that should be having more development from anyone else's leadership team, because they're often on uncharted waters after promotions and never been in that seat before. And they should be setting the example to the rest of the organization. If the leadership team aren't developing, why should anyone else in the organization develop? So, what we're trying to do with the data and behavioral data is first not to jump in too quickly and try and kind of prescribe some medication before we know what the issue is. We try and get in there and try and work that leadership team, and we do a session where we try and understand what is a high performing team. And then we kind of benchmark all the things that could be could be useful to them, and then we try and rate them 1 to 10 on where they think they are. And then we try and consider, well, if they were stronger, maybe 8 out of 10, what would that mean to the organization? So then we kind of work with them to kind of set a goal and, a plan to get there. So that's normally our foundation. So that helps us identify potentially where behavioral data can help. Now, there's lots of things that can help a high performing team, and we think about this thinking usually retention and engagement, performance. There's lots of things we can do. Now, behavior data is one of them, but it checks a lot of boxes, from trust to conflict to psychological safety to communication. So there's a lot of things we can do with behavioral data. But the first thing we try and do is actually really understand where the leadership team wants to get to. And often that's aligned to strategy. And then we want to try and identify where the priority is. And then from there, we're trying to work out, okay, what tools can we use to help them? And In that session, we normally do behavioral data because we know it's going to come up. The ones that come up are trust and communication, always.
Yeah, usually.
Yeah, so we know we're a safe bet to kind of pivot in that session, and just, we don't like to do too much content because people forget it. We want to do more action planning, but we know trust is going to come up and communication come up. So we normally start there. But what we want to try and do is map. We're trying to look at that leadership team and the rest of the organization and how we can execute strategy.
Yep.
And then what tools we can use to help them along that journey. Now, behavioral data is a big one, but it's a big subject. So that's our starting point.
Yeah. Scott, I wanted to ask you about how sort of context is important to this. Like one thing that I have certainly found is, as I work with teams, depending on the strategy they're trying to execute, right, the challenges that are in front of them, the goals they're trying to achieve, different strategies, different goals can often kind of need different kind of capabilities or different kind of profiles or different kind of different types of teams. And I've been impressed with how behavioral data can help kind of understand where a team might be naturally strong or naturally weak in certain areas and aligning that strategy. But I'm curious what you've noticed or what you see in terms of how to kind of take the behavioral data and then look at the context that they're operating within and connect these two. Like how do you use context to help develop more insights around the behavioral data?
Absolutely. So I love that you focused on needs, right? Because that's a big thing of what I talk about is like, what does this team need? And then what do the individuals on the team need to execute what the team needs? It's a great point. So for example, this team needs to move fast. How do we assign people to this team that can help make that happen? Or if the team is static, how do we get people who are on the team to move fast? And behavioral data can measure some of those things, such as autonomy and decision making and pace. So those are some of the things that it can measure and then connect to. I was just working with a team that actually needs to improve their lines of communication, right? That's their whole thing is hey, we're not communicating effectively internally, we're not communicating effectively with the client. So we kind of use that behavioral data to take a look at the whole team, right? It's like, okay, great, let's get some insights on this team's modus operandi, right, as individuals and as a group. And what we noticed was they were all very hard charging, all very assertive, all very dominant, behavioral drives, and not much in terms of people orientation, not much in terms of formality. So where communications should be written down and clear and people focused, they were doing verbal things, giving directives instead of inviting collaboration. When tying it to like, what's this team need to accomplish, all those behavioral insights, when you take a look at who the people are, you can start to see why they're struggling with something. And that kind of drives you to the next point, which is like, okay, so I need to manage this team or help this team understand that this might not be your natural forte. How do we bridge that gap? How do we take this and make it human and not say, well, you're not going to be able to do this, team? It's like, no, I need you to do this. We need to be effective here. How can I help you as an individual? How can I help you as a team bridge that gap from your natural styles to what this actual, goal requires?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I would say one of the things I've learned as a coach is I end up being a little bit of a counterweight, because once I understand the team and where their strengths and weaknesses are, part of my job as a coach is to kind of be a little bit of that balance. Like if they've got a weak spot on something, like I'll try to sit into that quadrant a little bit more in those meetings just to kind of create some leverage on the team. The other one I find the structure of the meetings and what is our actual meeting structure, our cadence, how do we manage ourselves? Like that ends up becoming a really interesting tool because, a team that is, really action oriented is not very good at details, right? Like I need to make sure they've got an agenda process that really, really hits all the details and forces them to think through all the details, versus if they're a very conservative team and I got to push them, right? My agendas need to make sure about, okay, well, like what is this going to achieve? How quickly can we do it? Yeah, you say it's going to be 10 weeks. What would it take to do in 5 weeks, right? Like it's designed to kind of push it. So using kind of the resources and the frameworks to kind of balance out the team can be really helpful.
So we can almost have a crystal ball. We can see into the future. So what we can do is we can align that team to a strategy, and we can actually ahead of time understand where that team's going to struggle. So it's almost like a crystal ball, and by mapping behavioral strategy against behavioral data, it's incredible.
I want to talk a little bit about kind of balancing teams and stuff a little bit, because I think that's another thing that I've learned over the years is that teams can kind of get, there's a balance that needs to happen. On one hand, you want everyone really aligned and everyone is very similar profiles. It will be very natural and fluid, but you'll have really significant blind spots and weaknesses. On the flip side, like if everyone's just kind of equally balanced, like it ends up, there's really no connection, right? Like I always find there's a little bit of this interplay between, I want to have enough sameness to drive kind of this feeling of connection, but I need enough difference to create, diversity and different opinions and be able to like not have too many blind spots. How do you, when you're looking at a situation, how do you kind of balance this kind of sameness versus difference in it? And how do you kind of help advise a team on where they either need to coach themselves, or if you're hiring, like if you got a couple of open roles, like how do you kind of target that from a behavioral profile so you achieve your kind of goal in terms of behavioral schema? Damon, why don't you kick us off on that one?
Starting with data. Yeah. So, data gives us insight, and the insight can help us with awareness and take action. Yeah. So again, we use predictive index for that. And going back earlier, I said when you come in and talk about behavioral data to leadership teams, their eyes roll. It's like, oh, we've done this before. You don't want to do it again. But when we can assess a team as a collective and align that to strategy, that's when we get excited. And I've been in those meetings, those sales calls, and those workshops where they don't want to be there because they've done it and they're bored. Then you plot their team type and look at their behavioral strengths as a collective and cautioning as a collective, and then map the strategy on it. That's when they suddenly just sit up and start getting engaged. I may be kind of deviating from your question, but in terms of understanding how you can support that leadership team, that's maybe has a different strategy, different growth stage as a company, different type of company, different industry. Starting about data to try and understand how aligned they are to the goals they're trying to achieve, and then having that as a discussion, and then from that discussion, moving that into action planning. And I may have deviated from the question, but I'm sure Scott can jump in and add some color to it.
Yeah. What's your thought on this, Scott? How do you balance teams that way?
Yeah. So the idea of balance is a really interesting one. And I'm often asked this by clients we work with. It's like, oh, should we have someone who kind of represents every working style in this team to create balance? And my answer to that is not necessarily, right? Like if the project team has to move super fast, or if it's limited to people who have a particular role, we don't always get to pick who's on the team, right? We can't always have ultimate flexibility in how we staff a team. So sometimes we might see a gap in a team and we don't have the option to balance it. And that's where the awareness and the insight becomes super important, right? Because if we know that we have that gap and we can see it in the data, then we can start to say, how will this gap hamstring us, right? In the execution of what we're trying to do. Say we need to move fast. We've got a lot of fast people, but we don't have anybody who looks to see the details or the process, or if we move too fast, what might we break? We don't have natural people on the team who do that. How do we build a process then? Like you said earlier, action planning and sort of strategy as you approach your goal. We know this is a gap. We know this is something we'll struggle with at the kickoff of our project or our work. How do we address that gap through tactics as opposed to staffing it? Now, when you have the option to staff in a certain way, being really thoughtful about the specific work that you're doing, right? Like if it's communication, hey, maybe we have the person who's naturally wired to communication on this team, balance us out in that regard, right? So it's really about, you work with what you have, you use those insights to develop a plan that stops you from being roadblocked. Awareness is more important than having natural balance, I would say. It's just that much more important, because that's what de-risks it really. Is that awareness and the adaptability, the fact that we can stretch, we can do things that aren't naturally wired to us with some extra energy and extra effort, but it gives us that awareness. And then it's our jobs as consultants, and yours, Bruce, is to help with that discipline of the execution piece, right? Like, hey, we've got the awareness, we've got the plan, now how do we create the discipline and the accountability in executing?
You brought up something I think it's really important to understand, and I run this to a lot with both teams, but also individual executives, which is, look, good executives, they can flex to just about any quadrant, right? Like it's not that you can't do these things. It's about what your natural state is, what your go-to state is, and appreciating that, okay, you can move quadrants, or you can adjust to fit a different situation, but it's going to take time, energy, and resources, right? So you need to be aware of that. You're making that flex, And we need to make sure that is the appropriate use of your energy, right? Do we really need to make that flex or not? And two, we need to know that you're going to have to recover too, right? Like that you can't do that 24/7 and not have some kind of, fatigue around it. So looking at when you're doing it and recovering from it in the appropriate ways, like what are your systems and tools, and then ultimately what is your longer term plan, right? Like is this, what do you need to do with the team, or what do you need to do with your role? I work with a lot of leaders where, okay, they're building out teams under them, right? One of the best things we can do to figure out, okay, where they're naturally strong, where are they weak in ways that are going to be, important for them, and how do we put people around them, put the people under them that are going to help balance that out. And I think really good executives appreciate they have weaknesses and they can flex into there, but they don't try to make that a long-term strategy. They try to build a context that they operate within that supports them in that, so they can continue to do the thing they do really, really well, and they don't have to try to flex nearly as much as they might in the beginning. I want to talk a little bit about some of the typical patterns that come up, or that behavioral data will start to give you. And Damon, you mentioned the false agreement, right? The dominant false agreement kind of pattern. But because these things come up so often, and it's kind of fun to see them play out on teams. What are some of the things that you look for, some of the patterns you see on leadership teams? Maybe you want to give a little more detail on the one that you mentioned before.
This is a fun subject. So I focus a lot on leadership team performance. And as you said earlier, leaders, you don't start off as a little CEO and become a big CEO. You come from a function. So you become, you come from a sales function, become a CEO, or a finance function, become a CEO. Now, if you think about that sales function, typically the natural behavior to be a good sales leader or a good individual contributor is you're high dominant, you're quick moving, you're comfortable with ambiguity. You may not be so good at detail. So it's a very specific behavioral type you'll see come through that sales journey. Now, suddenly they become a CEO and they go to be comfortable with numbers and analytics and, risk. Yeah. So all leaders generally stretch more than anyone. And there's four kind of main behavioral categories we kind of see. And often, we want to make sure those leaders are in that area where they can flourish and build a team around them. But often what I see happens, this is the common thing in these leadership teams, is I'll see a lot of leaders there's four main buckets we assess people in: innovation, agility, teamwork and employee experience, process and precision, and results and discipline. Now, there are four distinct areas for strategy and four distinct areas where we fall into, where we can excel. If we're in that bucket, we flourish. It fills our bucket up. If we're in an opposite bucket, it drains us. Okay. Now, in leadership teams, what I see is often a high number in innovation agility. So this is a team who's comfortable with ambiguity, comfortable with risk, fast-paced, not so concerned about the detail. And then as a company evolves and grows, we typically see a change of strategy. So in those early days, innovation agility is great. We're figuring out how to get things done. But as you build, often you go to build scalable processes. You go to drive results. You maybe get some disengagement from the wider organization. But we've got that same leadership team, and they're hardwired to focus on innovation agility. Then we often have one person or two people in that opposite quadrant of process and precision. These are our CFOs and COOs. And they're going, oh, hang on. we need to pump on the brakes here. Like, who's thinking about risk? So we got a team going, okay, they're innovating, they're having new projects, they're committing to too much. And then you're getting that opposite behavior, who's not comfortable in a meeting talking on the fly. They want to make decisions when they've got data. They want to reflect on decisions. So what happens is you get silent disagreement. You get artificial harmony. And when you think about conflict, we have mean-spirited conflict, we have got healthy conflict, and we have artificial harmony. And it's actually the artificial harmony that destroys teams. And that comes from behavior, often comes from dominant behavior who are comfortable with innovation and agility. And you also get a few of these people, so you get magnified behavior going on. Then you've got someone who's just saying, I'm not going to say anything. I disagree and I'm not going to say anything. And that misalignment is what destroys teams. And the good news is we can really easily unpick it. We can actually unpick that before it becomes a problem. We just need to use some science and data to do it. That's a very common, 8 times out of 10, that's what I'm seeing in leadership teams. I'm seeing
Yeah.
high dominant behavior causing friction with different behavioral types.
Yeah. Scott, what are
I
some of
have
the patterns? Yeah, go ahead.
So especially in places that were startups
Yeah,
or small to
exactly.
large companies, most
Mhm.
recently, like that's a really common pattern we see. I see a couple different ones in a couple of other places. So sometimes I think industry can dictate this, and sometimes I also think that founder behavior dictates a lot of patterns within a company, so intercompany. One I've noticed is with a lot of nonprofits. Actually, we
Ooh,
work with
interesting.
several nonprofits, and often when you have nonprofits, you'll find that the pattern sometimes tends to cluster in the teamwork
Yep.
category, and they don't focus on results and discipline and innovation and agility. And so what you'll find there is a lack of growth or accomplishment, a struggling mission, things like that, because you don't have someone who can step in and be that assertive dominant piece and rock the boat more, because they're nonprofits, they're mission driven, they're people first. That's their ethos, that's their culture. So a lot of times your company's values and culture will start to dictate these patterns subconsciously, which is why the behavioral data is so important in the first place, right? Because we'll naturally tend to gravitate towards picking people who share,
Yeah. Yeah.
what we think of as values and vision, but what we're really observing is behaviors, and picking people who share behaviors and traits with us, as opposed to just the values and the vision. And
Yeah.
so I noticed that a strong CEO or a strong company culture will push people into that cluster if they're not careful and paying attention to these facts, right? That
Yeah.
people are different and each bring something to the team. So that's what I notice when I see patterns.
Yeah, and you picked up one on there, but yeah, I definitely feel that the startup there's a pretty common pattern there is when you get the startup team and it starts becoming the growth team, and that like all the goals and things start to change, but that if the team hasn't made that shift, they run into all these problems, particularly with teamwork and the results and discipline, right? Like they just don't have the systems in place to really stabilize things and actually start focusing on, okay, how profitable are these projects? How profitable are these clients? Like how do we actually get the data and start making strategic decisions on it? They chase revenue and they're just grow without ever really looking at performance. Let's talk briefly about the hiring side, because I know that's the other side and it can be a little sticky at times. Like how do we effectively use behavioral data when it comes to, we've got a team and we're filling a couple of holes. Like how does behavioral science, help us with that kind of decision or that question? How do you go about doing that? Scott, let's hear from you on this one.
Yeah. So what we start with is by assessing the job itself, right? We
Okay.
think about like what is the role that we're hiring for? What are the key performance indicators and key outcomes we expect from this role? And we
Yeah.
start there. And then we work backwards, and we really use sort of a competency and behavioral based model, right?
Mhm.
Which is what are the behaviors that support those outcomes? What are the competencies that support those outcomes? We use an assessment tool where you kind of go through and you inventory what are the common and crucial tasks within a job, right? And
Yeah.
and when you start to look at the crucial tasks, hey, you're going to do the same thing at the same time at the same place every day. Okay, that's a measure of steadiness. So that's a behavioral drive that you can measure.
Yeah.
Hey, you're going to need to make a lot of decisions autonomously. You're going to be competing because you're a salesperson. Well, we
Mhm.
can measure competitiveness and dominance. That's a drive we can measure. And so by understanding the job itself and the crucial and repeated tasks that you're going to have to do that drive success, you can start to kind of understand a target. And then when we assess people, we can start to see, oh, are you kind of more naturally wired to that target or not? So it's not, again, it's not prescriptive. If you're a little bit outside of that target, it doesn't mean you can't do it. Like we talked about earlier, you can adapt, you
Yeah.
can stretch, but how much energy is it going to take? Do you have the awareness to be able to
Mhm.
stretch that much? Do you want to even stretch that much? We talk a lot about what's good for the company, but sometimes for the individual.
Yeah.
I'm sure we've all had jobs that we could do, but we
Oh yeah.
disliked.
Yeah.
Right. I've been in too many of them to count that it's like I can do this, but
Yep.
I'm not happy doing this. So from a company perspective, we want people that are going to enjoy the role because they're more productive. And from an employee's perspective, they're going to want to be in a role that's more their natural fit because they're going to be able to thrive and engage with the work more. So yeah, it starts with understanding the job, understanding the key things that you need to get out of the job, and then kind of aligning those to specific, defined, stable behavioral attributes, and then assessing against those. That's really how we tend to do it,
Yeah.
in our practice. And we add in some competency-based things that are skills, not behaviors. But
Yeah.
but yeah, when it comes to behavior specifically, that's how we start it.
Super helpful. We're going to hit time here. Damon, if people want to find out more about how you guys work, like how you guys get started, like give us some information and contact information for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're at talentoptimizers.com.
Uh-huh.
You can find all our contact details there, or just check me out or Scott on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll find us. We're connected to you, obviously.
Yep.
And yeah, we have a few kind of our vision or model, our values of better work, better world. So we really focus on trying to make workplaces a happier place. And with that in mind, we have a few kind of, what's the word, free offers, and there's a lot of value behind them, and we do it because we're generally passionate about making workplaces better. So I'd encourage anyone to take advantage of them. We do a fantastic team alignment strategy session, and there's no commitment to move forward, and you'll get that behavioral data. So we give you, it's a $3,000 workshop. We'll give you the behavioral data, and we'll spend some time mapping your strategy against that data. It's really powerful. And we often do a free high performance workshop. So just get in contact. We're happy to help. And, it makes us really happy if we can kind of make a difference to these teams.
Awesome. And Scott, the best way to get a hold of you if people want to find out more?
Yeah. Team, TEAM at talent-optimizers.com is an inbox that you can drop at. That's a pretty easy one, or hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm happy to respond to any requests for more information there. A good 15-minute coffee chat is all it takes.
Yeah, perfect. And if anyone gets a hold of me, bruce@eckfeldt.com is my email, eckfeldt.com URL, and then obviously on LinkedIn, we're all here. David, Scott, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you for inviting us.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks. And also for those watching, if you're again on the replay, go ahead and leave comments and questions. We'll watch those in the coming days and week and get back to you on those. And we'll see you on the next LinkedIn Live. Thanks, everyone.